And welcome into another episode of Third Round Reversal, Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here with Zach Malamud. Zach, what's going on with you?
Nothing much. Really excited for this episode. A lot of stuff to get into, and let's get right into it.
Yeah, so we wanted to do an episode where we kind of focus on some of those buy low candidates for Dynasty perspective. And we're going to go position by position here, give you guys some looks at some guys that you can probably get for a discount rate, whether it's via waivers or via trade. And so let's start out loud. Now we'll start out with some quarterbacks that we think, Zach, we'll kind of trade some guys back and forth. And we'll we'll explain a little bit and pick off of each other what we think. So let's start off. My first guy here, we have Kyler Murray. For me, I think Kyler's probably a buy low right now. Definitely not worth what he normally is worth. He's probably one of those first-round startup picks in one of those super leagues. However, right now with the injury, you could argue that he's probably not even worth even a second round, just based on the fact that he's not available this year. So, I mean, give us your thoughts on Kyler and where you think where he fits.
So the thing about Kyler is he's not going to be available most likely for the first part of the year. There is the chance that he could come back maybe at a later point in the season, but he's 25 years old. Obviously was the number one overall pick by Arizona and had that value in fantasy. Definitely going in was probably top 7 maybe in quarterbacks when you first started drafting in Dynasty. He definitely was one of those top guys that you had to go after at 25 years old. But right now, of course, he only played 11 games last year with the injury. However, he's definitely a buy low based on the injury, and he might not play. There obviously is still a ton of value there because he is 25 years old, but somebody definitely could give you a discount on a guy like Kyler Murray because he might not be active when it comes to week 1 this upcoming season. Maybe somebody who needs a quarterback right now, right away, going into week 1, looking at Kyler, he's probably not going to be back for week 1. Might be back, like I said, later points in the season, but you can definitely get a discount on him just based on he will not most likely be playing week 1.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things you really need to focus on here is he's not available right now. So therefore, if you're trying to take advantage of one of the contending teams in your league, I think that's where you lie in trying to get a guy who, again, you said it, he's 25 years old. So, there's a lot of rumors out there right now of what the future of the Arizona Cardinals is. And so it's kind of interesting just in the grand scheme of those worrying Kyler fans, worrying Kyler owners. And so he's probably the first guy that I would put on that list. The second guy, though, is probably Tua. So, Zach, just talk a little bit about Tua and what your thoughts are.
So it's similar to Kyler, of course, not the injury with Kyler Murray, but Tua is 25. However, he did have some injuries last season. Obviously, it's not going to affect him going into week 1, but definitely a bunch of scares. The concussions was definitely out. He was out for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks in the season. And you don't want that in a quarterback for the future. Probably would try and get somebody else if you're worried about Tua Tagovailoa, but that leads into the buy low. There's definitely a ton of talent there. The number 5 pick a couple of years ago in the draft, people will want Tua Tagovailoa on their team based on that offense that he has in Miami, but he is a buy low right now because of the concussion problems that he had last season.
Yeah, and I think it's probably even one of those guys that you could almost trade for those top picks. That's a guy that a lot of people are going to ask for. And so if you have one of those top picks and you're looking at, the quarterback class that's coming in, you're not very comfortable with them, Tua might be a guy that you go after. One of those mid-round super flex picks. It might be a guy that you look at just because, again, he's 25. There was that big scare this year when a couple weeks ago he even considered retiring. And so to me, again, that's a guy that you can go after, probably not worth what he actually should be worth.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And let's get into our next one, and that's Russell Wilson of the Denver Broncos. And Brett, just preview a little bit on Russell Wilson.
Yeah, so Wilson's an interesting one because he has a bit of age to him, but at the same time, he's still Russell Wilson that and that we grew up with. He doesn't run as much, but at the same time, he still is a very good decision maker. And yeah, he's 34, but at the same time, I think that this is going to be one of those bounce back seasons. It couldn't really get any worse for him. He had career worst in completion percentage, passer rating, touchdown passes, career high in sacks. He's probably a really good second quarterback for you in your Superflex league. And there's a lot of people who are panicking about his age and trying to get younger. And that's probably where you can take advantage of getting Russell Wilson in this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Obviously, you look at Russell Wilson and age 34. However, Russell Wilson, I mean, he's been playing most games, not a ton of injuries throughout his career. A guy that's really consistently on the field. You got to think that he's going to be that number one guy in Denver next 3, maybe 4 years, probably till he's 38, around there. You would have to say, just based on he's been healthy all that time while he was in Seattle and now in Denver last season. And he's a guy to look for most likely for a team that's maybe contending. If your dynasty team is near the top, you want a guy. We're talking about Russell Wilson last week. He's a sleeper heading into this year, a guy that can really have an impact for your team heading into this season. Russell Wilson, a guy to keep on the list, and definitely a buy low right now, just based on how poor last season was.
Yeah, and just like we spoke about with last episode, he's your second quarterback. So don't go out if you don't have a quarterback. If you're kind of stacked at quarterback, you need that second Superflex league quarterback to be able to, you have a guy that you're not as comfortable with, one of those like Garoppolo types, and you want a little more stability. You probably could take a chance on a Russell Wilson, who's a good backup quarterback for you, or your Superflex quarterback.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And let's head into our next one. That's Desmond Ridder.
Yeah, Zach, you want to go take Desmond Ridder?
So Desmond Ridder, yeah. So right now, Desmond Ridder in Dynasty is one of my quarterbacks. I actually just traded him. So I got rid of him. He's a buy low right now, just based on he's the starter right now, but people don't value him very highly, like myself, just because he's in that Atlanta offense that didn't look great last year. They've definitely had some struggles trying to figure things out. And now they're getting a guy like Bijan Robinson that now it could take a ton of the workload in that offense. But you think about the positives of Desmond Ridder, he's a starting quarterback, and you get, if you need one, you can put Desmond Ridder into your lineup in a super flex league. He could be a QB2 because he is a starting quarterback. A buy low right now based on the offense that he's in, but definitely a guy to look out for. And the age, he's so young and still has a ton of time in the NFL. A guy to definitely look out for.
Yeah, he's 23. And so he hasn't really proven himself, but they're giving him a chance. And so, I'm going to take a chance on him. There's always a chance he leaps into that top 20 conversation. And so he likes to run the ball. We talk about Bijan and what they're going to do there, but he also really likes to throw to the safe option. And they're going to let him do that when he's thrown to Bijan. He's thrown to Kyle Pitts, Drake London, who we'll get to in a little bit as well. But, he wasn't that bad as a quarterback. And so, yeah, you get a starter. And so if you're missing a starter as a super flex and there's a team in your league that has multiple quarterbacks that are going to be starting, maybe go after that team and see what you can get Ridder for.
Yeah, exactly. There's not going to be a ton of value in Ridder, but other than that, you look at, and he's a starter. So you get a starter in your lineup, you slot him in. It's very easy. And like I said, not going to be too much value there from Ridder.
All right, so we move to the next one, Trey Lance, and I'm a Trey Lance owner, and I've been approached of taking Trey Lance. I'm not selling him right now. I would buy him. I truly think that Trey Lance will end up being the starter. I think that they invested too much in his draft capital that they're not going to pencil him in right now as the starter, especially if Brock Purdy's not at 100% heading in. But he's 20, and so as a 23-year-old quarterback picked in the top 5 in the draft, I think you really have to look at what is the potential. And we didn't really get to see what he is. We got one game in a monsoon, and then we got hurt in week 2. And so he's unknown, uses less, high-value guy. And even if it doesn't work out in San Francisco, you know that a team's going to come calling for him.
Yeah, definitely. And you look at Lance, of course, that's why San Francisco drafted him, to be that guy, to be that number 1 quarterback, to fit into that Kyle Shanahan offense. The thing that caught everybody off guard was Brock Purdy and how well he played down the stretch and in the run-in, even in the playoffs last year for San Francisco. Of course, Trey Lance a buy low right now, just based on the injury. A lot of question marks. Will he stay in San Francisco? Nobody knows right now. And fantasy owners, maybe not Brett, who's not selling right now. However, somebody who may be questioning that and might need a quarterback at this moment in time could be selling Trey Lance. And he's definitely a buy low from that factor, just the injury and all the question marks.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of panic with Trey Lance owners. What's happening? Who's the starter? And one day he's really great, and he's the starter taking the reps with the ones and OTAs. But at the same time, you also have Sam Darnold looking over his shoulder, and that wasn't exactly a settling signing for Trey Lance owners. It was a little scary there for a couple moments.
Yeah, no doubt. And let's head into our next quarterback. And this one is a bit of a question mark just based on we haven't seen him play just yet. That man is Sam Howell, who could end up being the number 1 guy in Washington this season. And Brett, just take us through the buy low candidacy of Sam Howell.
Yeah, so we kind of spoke a little bit about him last episode, I believe it was. And he started in week 18. He was functional. Listen, he was an ordinary quarterback. 11 of 19, 169 yards, a touchdown, only threw 1 pick. They won 26-6 over Dallas. But at the same time, he's a guy who shows a lot of mobility, and he did it a lot in college. Ron Rivera really likes that mobile quarterback. You saw that a lot, especially when he was in Carolina, but now here when he's in Washington. And so let's see if it translates. Listen, it's a guy who's going to be a starter in the league. And so if you're one of those teams that needs a quarterback to fit your super flex, somehow be one of those guys that fits the mold. Again, he's 22. Take a chance.
Yeah, completely agree. And the best thing about Sam Howell is of course you mentioned the mobility, but he's most likely going to be that number 1, like we said, in Washington, and him and Jacoby Brissett might have a battle for it. Still question marks going in, but it seems as if Sam Howell is going to be that number 1 guy. And also Sam Howell was probably drafted in Dynasty last year to be that backup, a stash maybe. And it could be from a team who already has their quarterbacks in place, is not really thinking about putting Sam Howell in a starter spot in their lineup. So looking at that, you can definitely get a buy low on Sam Howell. And of course, like we mentioned with some of the other guys, he's going to be a starting quarterback this season.
Yeah, completely. And so let's head to our last quarterback that we have on here. It's Mac Jones. Now, Mac Jones is an interesting case. There were rumors coming out in the last couple of days that they tried to trade for Aaron Rodgers, and it didn't pan out. There were obviously last year concerns with Zappy and who's the real starter. And so I'm not really sure on Mac Jones. However, again, young age quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story there. He's so young, still has a ton of time in the NFL. And although it has not worked out so well so far in New England, there's still a lot of time left. This guy was a beast at Alabama. That's why New England ended up drafting him so early. And of course, yeah, the expectations are a little bit lower now for Mac Jones. that makes him a buy low, a guy to look out for. He could end up being a starter on another team. There could be other teams that are interested in him that are not New England right now. And looking at it, you definitely have to say he's a buy low. He finished quarterback 23 last year. He only played 14 games on the season. However, he's definitely a buy low and somebody you could definitely get for cheap right now if you need a quarterback.
Yeah, and it's all about, listen, when you're in Superflex, I understand that quarterbacks are ranked higher and therefore value is higher. At the same time, there's plenty of guys that you can get at quarterback position, especially if you're freaking out. Listen, I have one quarterback, but I need a second guy. You get some of those, lower tier quarterbacks, you can probably fit them in. And there's a chance that one of those guys pops.
Yeah, completely. And we've mentioned this a bunch. Mac Jones is most likely going to be the starter in New England. They really don't have a ton of other options. He's going to be the guy, and whether it works out or not is still a question, but definitely a guy to grab for the future just based on age. He's so young.
Yeah, and I think that, not that we haven't really seen what Mac Jones is, but I think the lack of receivers that they've had in New England hasn't exactly helped his case. And so, again, if it doesn't work out here, it might work out somewhere else.
Yeah, completely agree. Brett, let's head to running backs.
All right, so we jump into running backs, and we're going to start off with one that I'm not sure if he's a buy low. Zach thinks he might be. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. But Zach, head on to Saquon Barkley.
So Saquon Barkley, yes, there's a question mark there of is he a buy low? I definitely think he is, just based on the situation right now. Of course, he had a great season last year, but we do not know if he's going to be in New York next season, if he's going to be playing elsewhere, if he's going to hold out. Nobody really knows. And the value that Saquon Barkley can have for a team in Dynasty, you could get a good amount for a guy like Saquon Barkley. I list him as a buy low based on the question marks, the situation he's in right now. We do not know if he's going to be playing at the start of the season. They still have to figure things out with his contract. Will he get franchise tagged? All those question marks. There's a lot of value there for Saquon Barkley just based on how good he was last season. The buy low comes in because of those question marks that he has in New York.
I think still, to me, he's probably a top 5 Dynasty running back. And so from that standpoint, I think the potential is there. It's just about how can you convince an owner in your league to give him up? And yeah, it's about that uncertainty. Some of those panicky kind of owners. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is, listen, running backs kind of tail off around 26, 27, 28, 29, that range. And so there's a lot of people who are a little scared that he's going to tail off, especially if he gets that money. So, I can understand from the buy low. However, I don't know that the price on Saquon Barkley will be low.
I mean, that's fair. I think it's going to be lower than
I agree
expected.
With that.
Of course, he's not. You're not going to have to pay the full top 4 running back like he was last year. You're not going to have to pay that full price for Saquon Barkley, especially in Dynasty, just based on all the question marks. And then the age. Yeah, he's getting up there. He's getting into his second contract. And like you mentioned, he might tail off. We do not know. Every running back is really different when it comes to that. I will say the price is lower. He's not listed right now. If you were going to get an offer, it's not going to be, top 3 running back type of price for Saquon Barkley at this moment.
Agree. And if we were going to peg him in, let's say we were pegging him in a Dynasty draft, like a rookie draft pick, he's probably a later first rounder, which is not his actual value that he would be. He'd be worth an early first. And so, yeah, I would tend to agree with that it is lower, but it's not exactly low.
That's fair. That's a fair argument. We could agree to disagree.
So, I mean, it makes sense, though. This is low, not buy lower, And so you're not exactly you're not dumpster diving for him. But at the same time, yes, he does fit the mold of what buy low is because you are getting him at cheaper than his value.
Yes. All right, let's get into Alvin Kamara.
All right, so Kamara for me, he's an unknown. We still don't know about the suspension that we spoke about. He has a July 31st trial. That's literally when NFL camps are opening, and so there's always the chance that something comes out and then he's suspended for the year. And I think that right now is the biggest unknown. So if you're gonna trade for him, I would do it now. Do it now in the next month or so, just before that July 31st date. So there's not a lot of clarity and things like that. Now I think is when his volume or his value is lower.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You mentioned that end of July court date. That is the best time of year for redraft players, and knowing most likely if your redraft is going to end up being in August, and your draft for your league is going to end up being in August, that's the greatest thing that it's at the end of July, his court date. It is the worst possible thing for dynasty owners because, I mean, you're getting ready for the season at that point already. You're most likely past your rookie draft at that point. Now looking at Alvin Kamara, he's got to be a buy low at this point based on all the question marks. And you can get him for lower value. He was running back 16 last year, but it wasn't, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't peak Alvin Kamara. He did not have a ton of touchdowns, not a ton of production on the goal line. It wasn't his best season. So from that standpoint, his value is lower than it was in previous years, definitely.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we can look at is Jamal Williams, and we didn't have him written down, but he's also probably a really buy low candidate. Just thinking about Kamara, his situation, there's a chance that Jamal Williams is the lead guy there, and he's the number one because he's out for a year or an extended period of time. And so, Jamal Williams, I would say also is a guy that you could potentially target in your league.
Yeah, definitely. And just those running backs in New Orleans, still a question mark. Of course, if Kamara is there, he's the lead guy. But we mentioned, like you mentioned, Jamal Williams could be taking those goal line touches definitely away from Kamara if he's in the lineup.
Yeah. And so I think that it's fair to put him on that list as well. All right, so let's jump now. We spoke a little bit about Dalvin and his potential landing spots, but to me, he's a buy low right now just because we don't really know where he's going.
I'd say he's a buy low, but I can see why a ton of owners may be keeping him, maybe holding on to him just because he could end up in a great situation. Nobody knows. He is a buy low at this point, though, because we don't know. He might not be on a roster at the start of the season. So from that standpoint, if you get value for him now and looking towards this upcoming season, if you could get somebody who's going to have an impact for your team this season, you can give up Dalvin Cook and go get Dalvin Cook maybe. He's a buy low just based on all the question marks, but I can see why people will hold on to him right now.
Yeah, and I think that it is probably the smartest to hold on him, but at the same time, if you don't own him and you want to own him, now is the time to get him.
Yeah, definitely. And just looking at the stats, they don't lie. And of course, he was the lead running back in Minnesota last year, just on the edge of top 10. He was 11 and played 17 games last season. Wherever he goes, there's a lot of question marks. He's most likely going to be the lead guy and get more of a workload than he did in Minnesota last year.
Yeah, which is interesting. And I think not a lot of people are really talking about that. I think they're saying, oh, he'll be the backup. And I don't think that's the case either. I agree with you. I think he's going to be the one wherever he goes. And so that's why I would be, if as a Dalvin owner, would hesitate to give him up. However, if there's someone else in your league that is a little panicked about that, probably try to take advantage.
Yeah, definitely. He's a workhorse, and he's going to be one most likely wherever he goes. And let's get into our next guy, and that guy is a free agent right now as we speak. Still hasn't signed a contract extension in Dallas, and that is Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, so Zeke for me is an interesting case just because last year he wasn't that great. Obviously, he got out for the job. Tony Pollard came on and won the job, and it ended up resulting in Zeke getting cut and them getting out of that contract. At the same time, I still think that Ezekiel Elliott has some value. He's one of those guys that is an unknown in terms of where he'll be. He's 27, so that cliff is coming, and we've already kind of seen it a bit. And so, he's not exactly be your top running back on your team, but it's a guy that you can potentially target, and he's going to get goal line carries. I mean, it's something that he's been really good at his entire career, and there's a lot of teams that are missing that kind of running back.
Yeah, completely. And you mentioned the touchdowns and the goal line carries. He was sixth. He was tied for fourth in that with a couple of other guys. He had 12 touchdowns last year, 12 rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's great. That's a great season. Of course, you want that guy in your flex spot. If you have other options ahead of him, that's a great guy to plug into your lineup because if they get to the goal line, I mean, he's going to be the guy to slam it into the end zone. Definitely a guy to look out for right now, just based on he may not be in Dallas next year. I still think if he is in Dallas, he's still going to be the guy to get the goal line carries. And that may be painful for some Tony Pollard owners. However, they're going to go with the guy who can slam it into the end zone, the bigger, tougher running back, and that's Ezekiel Elliott. If owners are worried about that cliff right now, he's definitely a buy low.
And I think that it's one of those, if I could compare him to a player, it's almost like when you had Adrian Peterson towards the end of the career. There was that fantasy ad where everybody had to get Adrian Peterson because he was just getting all the goal line carries, Washington, and scoring a ton of fantasy points. So I would say it's more like that. Obviously, Zeke isn't as old as Adrian Peterson was. He's only 27. But at the same time, it's that specialization in inside the 10 carries.
Yeah, and the other thing about Zeke is he's most likely a backup right now on somebody's dynasty roster. Most likely a backup. He could be a starter. We don't know, but he's most likely a backup. They most likely have options ahead of him and will be more willing to trade him.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that to me says that you could probably give one of those mid-round or later round rookie picks if you were looking for a guy like Zeke.
Yeah, no doubt. And let's head into our next one. And up in Detroit, that is David Montgomery. Of course, Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted. He's most likely going to be the lead guy. Still a question mark there, Brett. Take us through David Montgomery.
Yeah, so Monty's interesting. I'm a Monty owner, and I truly think, and we spoke about this a couple of days ago, actually, I think that there's a chance that Monty actually ends up scoring more fantasy points this year than Gibbs does. And it's a very hot take, but I think it's a attainable thing just based on, I think that Gibbs is going to get a lot of the PPR points and, he'll get the carries and the work. I think Monty's going to be that, touchdown guy. And again, within the 10-yard line, I think they're going to go to Monty. I don't know that they're going to go to Gibbs. So there's a chance that David Montgomery ends up scoring a ton of fantasy points and potentially more than Gibbs does this year.
Completely agree with you. And you just go back to last year. That's the sample size right now. Of course, it's two different running backs than DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, excuse me. But now with Gibbs and Montgomery, same type of running back, same type of thing as those two guys last year. And of course, Gibbs is going to come in and he's going to have an impact, but he's still a rookie. He's still very young. He's not going to just come in and just take everything over like we think Bijan Robinson's going to end up doing. I think it's a little bit of a different situation in Detroit, and they're going to go with a more experienced back like David Montgomery in different situations rather than a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs.
And it's probably a second-round pick that you could be getting as well for him. I think that's one of those things you can look at.
Yeah, definitely agree. And let's get into our next guy, and that's in Los Angeles, and that's Cam Akers.
All right. Well, before we get that, we actually have a fan question now. So before we head to Cam Akers, so we got Chris in the chat. Thanks, Chris, for your question. He completed a dynasty trade today with our opinion. He traded the 5th pick, the 8th pick of the 2nd round, and a 2024 2nd-round pick for Tyreek Hill. So again, it's a 1st and 2 seconds for Tyreek Hill. Zach, what do you think of that trade?
So I actually, right now, I would say that's a really good trade. Of course, rookie drafts are big question marks because you don't know if those guys are going to be great. Really, the top, maybe 1st round, are really good. But really, after that, you don't know bust, you would have to say, when it comes to those guys. I think that's a great trade, just based on the value that Tyreek Hill has right now. He has Tua as his quarterback. They're in a great situation. You know he's going to end up getting the ball. He was number 2 last year among wide receivers. That's a good trade at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think the hit rate towards the back end of that 2nd round also is very, very low, lower at least as you start to get through the draft. And so, to give up really a 5, and then, if your team does really well, then it's another late 2. So to have 2 later 2s and the 5th pick of the draft, I'm not sure if you're getting the 5th pick of the draft, that would be worth more to me than Tyreek Hill. So yeah, I think you made out pretty well with Tyreek there.
Yeah, completely agree. And you mentioned the 5th pick of the draft. I mean, Tyreek, there's a lot of people that would be like, hey, number 1, give me Tyreek Hill. So you definitely got a bit of a bargain there with the 5th pick.
Yeah, it's a good Chris trade. A good trade, Chris. Sorry about that. So let's jump back into Cam Akers now.
And yeah, Cam Akers, I mean, a question mark throughout last season. Was he going to be on the Rams still? Was he going to get cut? Of course, he had the last 3 weeks of the season, I believe. I mean, this guy was unbelievable. He was running back 2 for the last 3 weeks of the season. Unreal stuff from him. A really talented running back. However, dynasty owners may have already given up on Cam Akers. You never know at this point. There's still question marks if he's going to be that number 1 guy in LA this upcoming year. He's a buy low at this moment in time, just based on, I do think that some dynasty owners may have moved past Cam Akers after they got frustrated last season. They were expecting him to be the number 1 guy in LA and one of their top running backs in dynasty. People might just be planning on getting rid of him.
Yeah, and it's funny because today we actually heard, it was today, Tom said he's going to be a huge part of the offense, and then he also used the term central figure. And so, yeah, Cam Akers is another guy that if you own him, you can't sell him because his value is really low, but you could buy him on the cheap. I'm a Cam Akers owner. It got a little scary when they almost cut him a couple weeks into the season, but he was running back 2 in the last 6 weeks of the season. So he's only 23. We spoke a couple weeks ago. It's a contract year for him. They only pick late round guys that they have on their roster. And so I think he has the potential to be a worse. And the age, he's at the age where those running backs kind of start to thrive. And so take advantage of your Cam Akers owner in your league because he's a guy that really is not worth a lot. And also to follow up on Chris, Chris actually has Garrett Wilson and Amon-Ra. And so to pair him with Tyreek, that's a pretty good, I think you made out pretty well.
That's a very solid trio. I wish I had the same. But yeah, like you said on Cam Akers, I mean, he's at the age right now. He's still super young, and we haven't seen the best of him just yet. There's still a lot of time. And if Sean McVay is calling him that central figure, that number 1 guy in that offense, the guy that they're going to work around, I mean, it's a really good sign going into this season.
Yeah, so now another guy, and, it's been hit or miss on him with Elijah Mitchell out there in San Francisco, and now they bring in Christian McCaffrey. But in the same case, Christian McCaffrey's been hurt for most of his career.
That's very true. And it was one of the first seasons that McCaffrey was fully healthy, not a ton of problems, nothing major that would keep him out or off the field last season. So that's a big plus for Christian McCaffrey owners. However, for Elijah Mitchell owners, a little bit sad and not what really you were expecting when you drafted him last year. Of course, McCaffrey got traded midway through the season. Eli Mitchell could have been the number one guy, and then it fell down. He's definitely the number two behind McCaffrey right now. However, there are the question marks because running backs just have such a short time span where they're really at their best. Eli Mitchell could get traded at any moment right now. Definitely a team could go and ask San Fran what they could be offering. I'm sure it's not going to be a lot because he's the backup running back to Christian McCaffrey right now. If you can buy low on him, you can enjoy the ride if Eli Mitchell ends up going to another team.
Yeah, I think there's a couple avenues. But there's the I own Christian McCaffrey avenue where you need to have that handcuff just based on you're not really sure about what the long-term health is of McCaffrey. But then there's the other side, which is they really, really like Jordan Mason. And you're right. They could just turn around and trade Elijah Mitchell just based on the fact that they really did like Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason was Pro Football Focus's second highest graded rusher in 2022. So to me, he's a guy that could push for that backup role. And I think that that's kind of scaring a lot of those Elijah Mitchell owners who were, thrilled with him when he first got there. And then he got hurt, obviously. They trade for McCaffrey, and now they're not so sure about him. So Eli Mitchell, definitely a guy that you could look out for not a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree. And let's get into our wide receivers. And the first two, we're gonna pair them together because they're both on the same team, both have the same problem. You would probably have to say. Still questions of who's going to be the starting quarterback, whether it's Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. Those two wide receivers are Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And Brett, one may be more valuable than the other, but they're both buy lows at this moment in time.
Yeah, we kind of spoke about this last week just because of the uncertainty. And for me, they're both very scary. We joke that we always put the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on our do not draft list. But at the same time, I understand Mike Evans. He had a great end of the season. He won a lot of people their leagues. And he might end up being one of those value monsters this year just based on the reliability and, Baker Mayfield's kind of unprovenness to him. And so to me, I think that Mike Evans is the target here over Godwin. I can understand that Godwin's value is way lower. I think the limited upside, though, is with Godwin. And so therefore, I'm taking Evans if I had to pick one to buy low for. And, he got traded in our league. And so it is a guy that people are a little scared on.
Yeah, he did get traded in our league, like you mentioned, and you would probably I agree with you. I'd pick Evans over Godwin right now as a buy low, just based on the value is lower. Of course, Chris Godwin, maybe the more reliable target for the quarterback who's going to come in and being that number one option, most likely over a guy like Evans, who's a little bit more of a deep threat than Godwin is. The short passes kind of guy is definitely Chris Godwin. They're both buy lows just because the situation. These guys could be moving towards the later stages of their career pretty soon. I mean, they're not too old, but they're moving past maybe what was a great stretch, maybe their prime, while they were with a guy like Tom Brady, who consistently found them while they were in the lineup.
Just on another trade that we spoke about in our league, I did ask, why would you want to go acquire Mike Evans? And one of the answers that I got was he might get traded. And I think that that's a valid thing to say, just from the standpoint of there is this situation where if the Bucs struggle, Mike Evans is a guy that a lot of teams are going to call on more than Godwin, which is why I would say target Evans over Godwin. But I think they'll both they both have a limited upside right now, but at the same time, there's always that week that Evans can go off. And so again, I would take him over Godwin.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and maybe the frustration of Evans could get the better of him and lead to a trade.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to go into D Hop, and we spoke a bit about him, but there's the potential that he ends up being the number one receiver for the team that he signs with.
So this is a big question mark, and I actually would make this a little bit similar to Saquon Barkley's situation. Of course, it's a different situation. Saquon's looking for a contract. Hopkins is looking for a new team. However, they're both really, really top guys when it comes to fantasy and guys that you want on your team. Of course, Barkley had a much better season than Hopkins last year. Maybe that has to do a little bit with the quarterback situation and the workload that Barkley got last year. However, Hopkins is definitely a buy low at this moment of time because of the question marks. He may not start the season on a team. We don't know at this moment in time. All of those question marks, somebody might try and sell him. And the age is getting a tiny bit up there. He's almost getting into his 30s if he's not there already. So definitely somebody to look out for in Dynasty. DeAndre Hopkins, just based on the question marks of where he's going to end up or if he'll end up somewhere before the start of the season.
Yeah, and the two teams that he visited with are the Tennessee Titans and the New England Patriots. And I say he could be the number one receiver at both of those places. Just his talent. And I think that that's kind of where he's looking for. So just like we said with a couple of the other guys, if you're going to try to trade for DeAndre Hopkins, trade for him now. Do not wait, because as the season starts to roll around and he starts to get those, he scores that first touchdown, everybody's going to be like, oh, I need him. Well, so get him now before the value goes way up.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Once that first touchdown goes in, everybody's going to be like, oh, well, should have gone to get him earlier. So do it now. Get it out of the way.
Another I would argue is that is Jameson Williams. And it's a guy that I actually traded for in the last week. 6 games spent in, a lot of guys a lot of owners are hesitant to give him a chance. And he was injured the first year, and now he's suspended this year, and he's only 22.
Yeah, the age is so young. Still a ton of time left, but the suspension comes down and owners get a little bit antsy on it. They panic a tiny bit. But this is definitely a guy who can be really, really good in the NFL. And it is a bit surprising to me that people are selling Jameson Williams so early in his career. However, it's understandable. You want maybe a more reliable target who's maybe more proven at this moment in time. But I think Jameson Williams is going to be a really, really good player, especially in Detroit, where the offense is a ton of passing, and they really find those wide receivers very well with Jared Goff at the helm.
And in our league, I think that he got flipped twice, actually, in the last 2 weeks. And so, one was a trap in draft, but the second one, I traded him for an early second-round pick, just based on that. I think that some of the receivers that you get in the first round won't be there in the very early of the second round. You need one of those kind of receivers. I think that he has the potential to hit the potential of the Zay Flowers, the Jackson Smith-Njigba, those 4 receivers there, Quentin Johnston. And so he has the potential to be one of those guys. We really haven't seen that yet. Therefore, I think that, even a late first, if you were getting something back, I think that's fair value there for Jameson.
Completely agree with you. He's most likely, a late first, maybe early second. That's solid value right now for Jameson Williams. Like I said, a bit surprising just based on it's so early in his career. But of course, the suspension has an impact, on that.
And another guy who a lot of people are giving up on early is Rashad Bateman. And, he's on your team. Why won't you give him up?
So this is another guy who I just feel like I haven't seen the best just yet. And there's still so much time. He's so young. The injury last year really hurt him. Of course, Baltimore wasn't in the best situation last year based on Lamar and all the question marks. Then he got hurt. Still just a lot of rumors swirling around throughout the season, and Bateman wasn't healthy. I can't sell him just yet. It's too early in his career. I mean, this guy was a beast when he was playing at Minnesota. They drafted him in the first round for a reason in Baltimore. He's a trustworthy guy for Lamar Jackson, and I think Lamar is going to take another step with Rashad Bateman, even with a ton of new targets in Baltimore this season.
Yeah, I think that them going out and drafting a wide receiver in the first round didn't exactly help his case. And then, of course, they go out and Odell Beckham. And so there's a lot of people out there that are very scared about him as well. He's 23 years old. Everybody relax. He literally had almost 20% target share up until he got injured. I think that the talent is there. He needs the health to comply. The breaking point season, so a lot of people are scared. So take advantage of that. Go out, get Rashad Bateman. You're probably not going to have to trade a lot for him, just based on that shock value.
Yeah, completely agree. Not me. I won't sell him, but somebody else will definitely. I can understand why people will give up so early on a guy like Rashad Bateman.
Yeah, it's another guy that you probably can give a second round pick for.
Yeah, definitely. And let's move into our next guy, and that's Drake London. Brett, a Dynasty owner of Drake London. Thoughts on him being a buy low at this moment in time?
Yeah, I feel like we're listing our whole rosters right now in this. But we do have Drake London. And, listen, we spoke about him. He had a great rookie year. He underwhelmed, though. And so he finished in wide receiver 43 spot. But he had the fifth highest target share in the league, second highest per route run rate among wide receivers. But then in the last couple weeks of the season, he emerged as wide receiver 20. However, he didn't score a touchdown. And so not a lot of people are really looking at him. And we spoke a little bit about Desmond Ridder before, about how he's a buy low candidate. I think that with Drake London, he falls into that same category of, the people who are almost doubting him just based on who his quarterback is. And I don't know that you could really do that. I think that, he's a guy who can push into low-end wide receiver 2 territory, and he's being valued as a wide receiver 3 or 4 right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's pretty funny how in Atlanta, Bijan comes in, everybody's a buy low at this moment in time. It just shows how bad they were last year and how many question marks they left on that roster with all these guys now being buy lows. But I completely agree with you. With Drake London, he's the number one wide receiver. Of course, there's value there. It's a little bit less just based on it's still a question mark of the quarterback. Is it going to work out with Desmond Ridder? You think, okay, they could build a connection quarterback wide receiver duo, but there's still the question marks, and people might be selling Drake London very early in his career, even with him being the number one wide receiver in Atlanta. If you can get Drake London, oh my God, that's perfect, because you would think at some point in time, Atlanta is going to figure out a quarterback and try and build that duo with Drake London.
Yeah, and it's like we just spoke about with Jameson Williams. I mean, the guy is 21. And so we haven't seen what Drake London can do. We saw a couple jump balls here that he won, but at the same time, he could be the favorite target of Ridder, and all of a sudden he's getting wide receiver 1 numbers because he's just becoming a monster scoring the touchdowns. But it doesn't work out with Ridder. You could bet that they're going to get a quarterback there that can get Drake London and, of course, Kyle Pitts, who we're going to speak about in a little bit. They're going to get them both the ball.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And let's move on to our next one, and that's KJ Osborne up in Minnesota. Of course, thinking about it, Adam Thielen left. He could be the number 2 option, but then they drafted Jordan Addison, and that went all downhill from there. KJ Osborne, a buy low, Brett?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's 26. He finds the end zone, and yeah, Jordan's probably going to be like the de facto number 2. But at the same time, I think that we will find KJ Osborne in the end zone more times than not on red zone, and everyone's going to be like, where did he come from? And we said it last year, but yeah, it was Adam Thielen. And so Thielen's not there. I think Addison's more open. Addison is more able to get open in the middle of the field than Osborne is. And so I think they're going to utilize him there. But, again, red zone target. I think that he's going to score a ton of points on that red zone targets.
I completely agree with you just based on Adam Thielen. The reason I drafted Adam Thielen in redraft league was always because of the touchdowns. The value was there. Justin Jefferson wasn't going to get every touchdown. Adam Thielen ended up getting them. And then Jay Osborne, as last year grew on, took a lot of those touchdowns as well. So this is a guy to watch out for. Kirk Cousins knows him. He's a reliable target for Kirk Cousins in that Minnesota. Even with Addison coming in, Osborne can definitely have, and he's not going to just based on he's the third wide receiver you'd have to say right now in Minnesota.
Yeah, and so buy low, just buy low. All right, let's move on to the next one. Zay Jones, Zach, you love Zay Jones. Tell us why.
I love Zay Jones, and there's the question, of course, that Calvin Ridley is going to come in, but Zay Jones burst onto the scene last year and finally found a home somewhere in Jacksonville. There was the question marks in Buffalo. There was the question marks in Vegas. Now he shows up in Jacksonville, and he had a great season last year. A really strong season. I think he was wide receiver 26 on the season. Who expected that from Zay Jones going into last season? Of course, Ridley's coming in, and that'll take some of the targets away. But Zay Jones being a target for Trevor Lawrence like he was last year, I definitely think he's a guy to look out for. There's a ton of wide receivers in that offense, and Trevor Lawrence is going to be throwing the ball. He's going to be slinging it around the field, and he has those targets on offense, including Evan Ingram at tight end. Zay Jones is a buy low right now. I think he can have an impact in that Jacksonville offense once again this season.
I think it's that scare factor. Again, like we spoke about before, the new guy comes in, and all of a sudden these guys that were getting the ball and all of that, people are scared that they're not going to get the ball anymore. Listen, Zay Jones was a top 30 receiver in getting open last year in run win rate. He was 18th in targets. And so a lot of people are valuing him as like a wide receiver 5 on their team. I don't know how he could be valued that low. I think that it's a guy that you could probably get for dirt cheap right now.
Yeah, completely. And yes, he might be on some benches right now, probably on the edge of some benches right now, but that's a perfect spot for him. The value is pretty low, you would have to say, when it comes to that. And you definitely get him for really cheap with Ridley coming in.
Yeah, and in some of those leagues where you got multiple wide receivers, you got those flex spots also. Some of them have super flex. You're going to need your receivers. Guys go down all the time, and that's a guy that even if he's not in your starting lineup right now, you could easily plug him in any given week, especially if he goes off, if you need more depth on your team.
Yeah, completely. And let's move on to our next two. We'll pair them together, another two teammates in Denver. Courtland Sutton, KJ Hamler, of course, Jerry Jeudy took a huge step. Most likely, he's the number one guy. It's clear as day after last season what he was able to do with Russell Wilson, even with a poor season. Jerry Jeudy was a beast last year. That takes the value a little bit lower from Courtland Sutton and KJ Hamler, Brett.
Yeah, so for Hamler, it's an interesting one. He did have surgery a couple months ago, and so for me, he's probably a guy that's going to be out there on waivers even in a lot of these dynasty leagues. He's 23 years old, though. It's a guy that you can stick on the end of your bench. And so when you buy low, you're basically, you're trading your last pick of your rookie draft, or you're going to just get on waivers just to take the chance on the 23-year-old receiver. But with Courtland Sutton, I feel like there were parts of the season where we were like, wait, Courtland Sutton's the favorite receiver. That's Russell's favorite target. And so to me, I think that you can't really doubt that, especially if you're buying low on a guy like Russell Wilson. He might be fun to pair, to stack the two guys together if you wanted to go get Courtland Sutton as well. He was 11th in deep target and 22nd in red zone targets. And so, that he's going to score some touchdowns. And so it's again one of those guys that I probably wouldn't take as my first wide receiver, or maybe even my second. He'd probably be a good third receiver if you need him for your wide receiver 3 spot, or your super flex, or not your super flex, your regular flex spot on your roster. That's probably where he fits in for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just looking at Cortland Sutton last year, yeah, it was a struggle. Of course it was, but the second most receptions he's had in his career was last season, and he had 109 targets. That's a ton of targets, 64 receptions on 109 targets. The target share is definitely there. They just need to work on the chemistry and get those targets as completions. And Cortland Sutton could be a really dangerous option for Russell Wilson. They just needed to work on it a little bit. Of course, last year, it was definitely a struggle in Denver. There's a ton of value in Cortland Sutton as a buy low, just based on people may have given up on him already after seeing last season.
Yes, let's kind of mix a little bit here. We're going to take both Bills guys that we have on this list. So we're going to work our way into the tight ends a little bit, one at the same time using some receivers. So we're going to pair Gabe Davis and also Dawson Knox. They're both buy lows right now. I think that, Dalton Kincaid coming in and Stephon Diggs, showing up for camp on the second day, and everything was well there. And they seem to be a good pairing right now, at least. I think that right now you could probably get Gabe Davis and Dawson Knox both on the.
Yeah, completely. Gabe Davis, I talked about him a couple of weeks ago. Just not a fan right now. Just based on he's such a boomer bust, and maybe the biggest boomer bust in fantasy football as we speak. He had 48 receptions last year on 93 targets. I mean, very low amount of receptions for a guy who is the wide receiver too on Buffalo. It's a great offense. He should be getting a ton of fantasy points. He was wide receiver 36. So definitely a buy low at this moment in time. You could maybe want to ride the wave with Gabe Davis. Of course, the positives, like I said, he's wide receiver 2 in Buffalo. However, then you look at the tight ends, and Dalton Kincaid comes into this offense. Yeah, they can maybe try and work out some 2 tight end sets, maybe try and trick some defenses, but you would most likely say that Kincaid's going to take over as the number 1 guy ahead of Knox. Knox could end up still getting touchdowns, though. That's something to hold on to and makes him a solid buy low guy up in Buffalo.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of talk about where they're going to play Kincaid, and they really haven't, it's rumors until we see week 1 how they line up. But, whether he's going to line up in the slot or whether he's going to line up right off the line, it's interesting because Dawson Knox likes to line up. They put him in the regular tight end spot just off the tackle, and he scores a ton of red zone touchdowns. He just did. He had a touchdown in all 4 games down the stretch. Last 4 games of the year, he had a touchdown each week. And so they'll play them a lot together. As far as when he's not there and they play just Kincaid in off the tackle, you're probably seeing Gabe Davis at least out wide. And so there's the potential. Listen, he has Josh Allen throwing him the ball. And so you never really know what Josh Allen's going to do. And so, yes, there's the hit or miss of Gabe Davis. I'm not saying go out and trade for him and make him your second wide receiver. But at the same time, it's one of those guys that as you start to grow your depth, he could be a guy that you would want to add just to have as depth guy, if not the flex guy, especially if he starts to go off a couple weeks and Josh Allen starts to favor him.
Yeah, completely agree. As a depth guy, Gabe Davis has a ton of value. You can plug him in 1 week. If he doesn't do good, then you bench him again, and it all works out for you.
Yeah, exactly. Another guy who is in that category is Michael Gallup. Now, I'm not going to speak about Michael Gallup. He's on my draft list. But at the same time, Zach, I can understand why you like him.
Well, he's on my roster in Dynasty. I've tried to hold on to him. I've tried to move on with it. It's definitely a little frustrating right now with Brandon Cooks now in Dallas, and that has pushed Michael Gallup's value a little bit lower. Just based on CeeDee Lamb is going to get his touches in that offense. Of course, Tony Pollard's going to get his touches at running back and maybe in the passing game as well, excuse me. But looking at Michael Gallup, he's most likely the third option, you would have to say, just based on Cooks is a deep threat that can also go short, and the speed factor of Cooks, definitely something that stands out with him. Gallup is the third wide receiver, though, and that pushes his value a little bit lower. But very young. They gave him a contract for a reason. He got that money for a reason at wide receiver. I have not lost hope just yet, but yeah, his value is definitely lower than it was at the start of last season.
Yeah, and we're going to kind of make a little here with Dallas as I also want to bring up Jake Ferguson a little bit. Now, listen, a lot of people were a little scared when Luke Schumacher picked and his route runs, but Ferguson, he proved himself to be pretty good as well. I don't know that you can really brush him off. He might be a guy that's out there on waivers for you. If not, you could get him for dirt cheap, just based on the fact that they did draft tight end. But in terms of Gallup, listen, I understand the reliability of Cooks and CeeDee Lamb, but at the same time, Gallup might be a guy, again, I don't want him, but I can understand based on the fact that his value is low, why somebody would want to take a chance on him.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just touching quickly on Ferguson, he's probably going to be that number one guy. Of course, Schumacher's there, but like Ferguson has played with Dak before. Quarterbacks love going back to their reliable targets before they move on to a rookie earlier in their career.
Big Bob Tonyan. That's who he is. He's Big Bob Tonyan. And so I think he's a guy that you definitely can't discount. We move into the next one. Adam Thielen. I don't know why everybody's forgetting about Adam Thielen. And, we just spoke about him a minute ago. He's that red zone guy. And for some reason, everybody keeps brushing him off. And now he's going to have a chance to play with a rookie. And, yeah, it's a little scary when you're playing with a rookie. But at the same time, I think that he might be a safety valve for him.
There is no chance that somebody is going to convince me that Adam Thielen is not Bryce Young's top target heading into the season. There's nothing you can tell me from the guys that are around him, DJ Chark, Jonathan Mingo, Ian Thomas, Hayden Hurst. Adam Thielen is the number one guy. He's going to be that reliable target, like Brett just said. He's going to be the safety valve as well. Just go to him, and then he's going to go in the red zone. Of course, reliable target in the end zone. Of course, Bryce Young, a rookie, is going to go to Adam Thielen. Buy low on Adam Thielen right now. People are valuing him very low because they think he may not be in that good of an offense heading into this year. Those are where you get the fantasy points from those lower teams. They build up fantasy numbers like you wouldn't expect. Grab Adam Thielen while you can, because the value, like Brett mentioned, is very low on this guy.
Especially when you're scoring touchdowns. I mean, it's a guy who really scores a ton of touchdowns, and we just spoke about that, especially in the red zone. Take Adam Thielen, and I think that he's going to grow with Bryce Young together. Yeah,
I completely agree with you.
All right, so the last one that I have on here, and it's more so of one of those adds to the very end of your bench, just because his value's not there. He's a free agent right now, but in his career, he's proven himself that he could be a really good wide receiver, and that's Kenny Golladay. And I don't know that you can completely dismiss Kenny Galladay's ability. He didn't really get on the field this year a ton with the Giants. There were the couple games where he would come running on the field, the whole stands would give him standing ovation, and then they wouldn't even look at him, and then he'd run off, for the next play to the sideline. And so they didn't give him a chance. They cut him just based on the salary. And I think that Kenny Golladay, at his next step, he might be able to get at least some sort of fantasy relevance.
Yeah, I agree with you. And a guy to look out for right now. Of course, the last couple of seasons have been awful. Not what you wanted or what you expected a couple of years ago when he was thriving in Detroit. However, now I agree with you. He's a buy low. He might be on waivers. He might as well go pick him up. He could have a impact on a team if he goes there next. Wherever he ends up going, he could have a really solid impact because the talent is definitely there. Of course, like the talent is there, and Detroit relied on him. You see the tape of what he was able to do in Detroit. He can definitely do that somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that for me, just take a chance on him, and even if it's not you're not picking him up right now, at least keep an eye on him for where he does land when he does sign the team, and pick him up then, because I think that once the team figures out his value, I think that the sky's the limit for him.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right, so now we're going to jump back over to Atlanta, where we're going to talk a little bit about Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts right now, arguably the biggest buy low candidate in all of fantasy. He's high risk, high reward. He tore his MCL, missed the last 6 games, isn't practicing in OTAs. What's going on? They're not going to pass the ball this year. It brought Bijan, and there's a lot of worry about him for a really, really young, talented tight end who has the potential to end up being the top tight end in a couple seasons.
So we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we went through Atlanta, and I said that this upcoming year, I'm not high on Kyle Pitts. I probably going to end up staying away when it comes to redraft. If you can get Kyle Pitts right now in Dynasty, go ahead. Go ahead. He's so young. They drafted this guy with the 4th overall pick. If he doesn't work out in Atlanta, I mean, somebody else will grab him. The talent is unbelievable. This guy is basically a wide receiver. So he really is a strong guy that's going to be a reliable fantasy target in the future. Go out and get him in Dynasty. But like I said, I'm going to stay away in redraft just because the situation's a big question mark in Atlanta right now.
Yeah, I mean, when he first came out, everybody was saying he's a unicorn. And I think that still remains that sort of talent. And so go get him. I mean, there's not going to be a ton of college owners that are going to want to trade him in Dynasty. But at the same time, you got to give to get. And so if if people are looking at, some of your guys that might be a little more intriguing, they might look at Kyle. You might have to look at Kyle Pitts as a guy on their team to take. But yeah, I don't know. I think Kyle Pitts is going to go for way lower than what his value is actually going to be.
Completely. This guy could be a top 3 tight end within the next 2 years, and we just don't know about it.
Yeah, completely. A guy who was in the top 5 as the start of this past season was Zach Ertz. He was a top 5 tight end through the first 10 weeks, tore his ACL, tore his MCL, and then Trey McBride came in, and he didn't exactly take the job, but he did very well in the last 7 games. A lot of worry going on, obviously, with the Kyler situation, but Zach Ertz right now probably a good buy low candidate.
I think he's a buy low based on that. You could say that Arizona is in a rebuild at this moment in time, and they might end up trading him. They might not want to give him a big contract. They might say, hey, all right, Trey McBride's ready. We're just going to roll with him, and Zach Ertz can end up somewhere else. But while he's on the field, while he's healthy, he's a top 5 tight end, like we mentioned. He was a really, really strong target for Kyler in the first 10 weeks of the season. And if he ends up somewhere else, he's going to be the number 1 tight end. You would have to say on that team. The value is definitely there. Go get him while the value is so low and a bunch of question marks, injuries, rebuilds. He might get traded. Who knows? Go get him. He's definitely a buy low target.
And I think that even if he is still in Arizona, I'm not sure, got rid of D-Hop. And so I'm not sure how many targets are going to go to receivers from Colt McCoy. He likes to throw to the tight end. So therefore, you might get a lot of value actually from Zach Ertz this year. And again, McBride came in and he was pretty good at the end of the year. So the value right now, not too high on Ertz, especially coming off of the injury.
Yeah, completely. And of course, the age may scare you. He's at 32 right now. But if you're looking for the next like 3-4 years, a great guy to get because he's going to have some great performances wherever he ends up.
Yeah, you're not giving up a ton for him, but at the same time, it's a guy that'll have an impact on your roster.
Yeah, completely agree.
All right, so let's head to our last guy, and it's a guy who was the biggest buzz of the entire training camp preseason last year. It was Isaiah Likely. And, there was a lot of question marks about what was going to happen with Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews ends up coming in, getting the job anyway. Mark Andrews, he's 27, but at the same time, you got Isaiah Likely who's coming, he's 23. Is there a chance that we see 2 tight end sets out there in Baltimore?
I think there's a great chance of that because their quarterback, who's now going to be there for a while, Lamar Jackson, loves throwing to tight ends. We've seen that throughout his career already. His favorite target is always Mark Andrews. And if he could have another guy like that, Isaiah Likely, I mean, it's perfect for Likely. And people may not be selling him just yet because it's very early in his career. They could just be stashing him right now as we speak. But definitely if guys want a higher level tight end at this moment in time, grab Isaiah Likely because he's a guy to look out for the future.
Yeah, Isaiah Likely had 28 catches, 270 yards, 3 touchdowns in his rookie season. And so for me, yeah, I think it's a guy that he's a young guy. Stash him on your bench. If he's out there on waivers, obviously go grab him, but he's available in many dynasty leagues. At the same time, stash him, as one of those depth tight ends. Even if you're not using him on your roster, you get him for pretty cheap. Again, probably one of those later rookie picks. If a guy's trying to move up in the draft, something like that, where you can probably acquire a guy like Isaiah Likely. And yeah, listen, if Mark Andrews stays healthy, then his value is probably not going to be that high, Isaiah Likely. But at the same time, there's always the potential that they end up with the 2 tight end set, like we just said. And so for Lamar, yeah, he likes throwing to the tight end. So I can understand the value there for Isaiah Likely, even if both are involved.
Yeah, completely agree. And you look at the age. Yeah, I mean, 23. We talk about a lot of these guys. People give up very early in their career, give up on them. A guy like Isaiah Likely is a good snag to have in Dynasty right now.
All right, so that'll do it for episode 6 of the Dynasty Buy Lows here on the Fantasy Football Podcast. Next week, we're going to head to talk about some of the Dynasty sells. And in a few weeks, we're going to talk about some sleepers as we start into redraft season. But until the next one, Zach, we'll see you next week. Brett Malamud signing off the 3rd Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Take care, everyone.